People warned me when I came there, like, everybody in New York's mean, nobody says hi, when you get in the elevators, nobody's going to say hello to you. It's just a different culture. It doesn't mean they're unkind or they're mean to you, they're just different people.
I don't know, it's a pretty good place already. I love New York.
I like the crowd, I like the hustle, I like there's so much to do. It never sleeps out here, you know? You can be outside at 3 a.m. and there's something to do.
I've been here for 31 years and I think it's wonderful. I've seen a lot of improvements in the last few years. It's my phone.
It's coming from Arizona. Everybody's like, oh, New Yorkers are rude, but people are just very little pushy and, you know, trying to get to wherever they need to go, which you have to be like that to get anywhere around here. But sometimes I kind of wish that people would be a little bit more courteous to others, I guess.
When Redeemer began, there were 3 goals, and each goal was based on a premise. The first goal was we did not want to be a church just for ourselves, but also for our friends who didn't yet believe, that they could come and process faith. That was based on the premise that the gospel is what both a Christian and a person who is not a Christian needs. That when I come and in worship we're able to take a look at the gospel, that the gospel changes everything in me as a believer and changes anyone I bring. The second basic goal was that we didn't want to be a church just for ourselves, but for the entire city. The city is a place where Christians should live if they can. There's no better place to live than in the city and minister than the city. And our goal was not just for a great church, but for a great city, that we wanted Redeemer to simply be a means to the end of. And the third goal was we didn't just want to be a single church, but we wanted to be a movement of the gospel that helped many churches and planted many churches. And the premise behind that goal is that the church is supposed to comprise every tongue, tribe, people, and nation, every race and class, and therefore it's the church of the whole city that is really the Church of Jesus Christ and not any one particular congregation.
God is in, I think, everyone's thoughts at one time or another, whether they say they believe or not, or don't believe. But as I said, I'm not too involved in that end of it myself.
There are probably a lot of people who are just satisfied with getting up at 6 a.m., waiting in line to get on the subway at 7 a.m., getting to work at 9, working all day, coming home, getting home at 7 or 8 p.m., and that's all there is.
I never heard Tim Keller give a sermon until the first service we had. What we did was pray. We talked about New York. We talked about what do New Yorkers need? What are New Yorkers like? And we hashed that around. We prayed about it. We looked at God and we said, I think God does want a new wineskin.
I remember being called into a small group of 5 people, and Tim challenged us in the first months of the church to just pray wildly. And we were to pray that we would have a worship service where there were 250 people. And it kind of challenged my belief, which was limited at that point and growing, that we could even have that many people at this church. And it's been so extraordinary to see the growth.
What's, I think, unusual about being at Redeemer since its beginning, and also since I was a relatively new Christian at the time, the Redeemer model of ministry has just infused into my life. It seems like the normal way to do church, even though now that I'm a church planner, I realize when you look at other churches around, it's completely radical, it's very different, it's very odd. Nobody understands it. When you try to explain it to them, you just have to do it. And yet for me, it just seems like the normal way to do things. I remember, I think my first conversation with Tim Keller was about my desire to be a church planter. And Tim was talking about how Redeemer one day would be a church planting church. Now, I had no idea what direction that was going to take, because that was a long time ago, more than 10 years ago.
It would be far better to have 25 to 50 to 100 medium-sized, strong, vibrant churches than to have one megachurch. And I see the hope for this expanding movement of the gospel here in the city related to many churches, not one great big megachurch.
When Redeemer started, 11, 12 years ago, the plan was to saturate New York City with lots of churches. In other words, the idea was that Redeemer would be a movement of churches. And what happened is the Lord gave to the mother church this phenomenal growth and this wonderful ministry, but the initial vision has always been there.
Two of our friends actually became members here after moving to the city and gave us what was the first vision pamphlet for the Redeemer vision for planting 100 churches in the next 15 years. And then after meeting a number of church planters in the Redeemer network, the Lord brought us here to Montclair, New Jersey.
Redeemer is a regional gathering movement that ministers to a certain demographic. What the movement needs is a whole series, scores of neighborhood churches.
New York City is today the capital of the world. All nations around the world are here today. And as you know, through church planting, you can reach nations. And church planting is the most effective way to do evangelism.
If you're going to make an impact on a city, which has always been Redeemer's, one of Redeemer's goals from the outset, it really requires a combination or a multitude of types of models. You need large regional churches like Redeemer. You also can't do without neighborhood churches. It's actually the unique combination of those kinds of churches that are able to make a genuine impact on the city.
New Song Harlem, apart from the desire to be a really great community church for the local Harlem community, it also has great aspirations to be a really great training center. And so we definitely, have worked a lot, and especially in the early stage, on helping to build the kind of infrastructure that can then support other church plants in neighborhoods like East Harlem or the South Bronx, East New York, neighborhoods like that.
And I think that's the key thing to understand, is that Redeemer right now is not just planting other churches, but they're planting sort of movement launching churches in major urban areas. So we're going into Toronto, Vancouver, San Francisco, Seattle, San Diego, not with just a church, but a church that can now then plant an entire movement of churches around a huge metropolitan area.
Say one of the great stories of Redeemer is pioneering the idea that the city is a great place to minister and a great place to live.
There are lots of things that could make New York a better place. One of them, I think, is better housing for people who live here, so that people could actually afford to live here.
If there was more places to park for free, instead of paying like $13 for parking.
Looking on the streets, there's like people without jobs trying to make money in like any way, shape, or form. So if like more jobs are made available, I suppose.
In the earliest days, we said the goal of Redeemer is not to build a great church, but to build a great city. And Redeemer is just a means to that end.
Hope for New York helps to make New York a great city by serving the city, by providing opportunities for people to work with ministries all over New York in all 5 boroughs. New York as a city is comprised of its people. Our buildings are beautiful, our architecture is great, but what makes a city is its people. And Hope for New York helps to connect people to help other people through ministries that work with the homeless, with children, toddlers, infants, with the elderly, after-school programs. In all 5 boroughs, they're making a difference through faith-based organizations.
A lot of the messages of our culture are to stay sufficient, not ask for help, to act as if everything's okay when it's really not. And I think that coming forward to ask for help can be very difficult. We see a whole variety from unemployment to other financial struggles, such as mounting debt, or someone who just doesn't know how to budget and wants to learn how to budget. Folks that are emotionally struggling and need to go to counseling but can't afford to pay for it.
The diaconate decided to come to Pier 94 because it was a response to the World Trade Center tragedy. They really just thought it was a need that the city has now because of the tragedy. And so we had Bibles on the tables for them, for people who wanted them. We've given out food gift certificates and Metro cards, and also referred them to the diaconate, to Redeemer's diaconate, so that they would get further assistance.
I think the reason why people are willing to reach out to friends and associates and contacts and invite them to Redeemer or expose them to Redeemer has a lot to do with Redeemer's vision of being city friendly. And it touches our view of the arts, it touches our view of politics, it touches the view of social needs. Redeemer is a church for the city.
By holding a worship service in a public facility, this gives our ministry volunteers and workers an excellent opportunity to share the gospel at any given moment, at any given time, which I think is what we're all about.
So what we've been trying to meld together is this idea of Christians working with both excellence and Christian distinctiveness, which means that we want Christians to be in the marketplace. We want them to be playing at the highest level. We want them to be very much involved in the cultural life of New York. At the same time, we want them to understand what is the motivation behind what you do. What difference does it make that you're a Christian painter, a Christian jazz musician, a Christian violinist?
Well, except for places like St. Patrick's, you don't really know about any churches in New York. Like there's a WWF New York sign on every corner about, but you don't really know about churches till you walk past them.
I know when I moved to New York, it took me a long time to find a church at all, because I just didn't know where to look.
That's a very difficult question, because I sort of feel that organized religion has a place, but not necessarily in my own life.
And I first came to Redeemer with someone I was dating, and he invited me. I was not a Christian. Well, it was a Presbyterian church. I thought, well, I can't be too weird, so I would come. And he dragged me way down front. So we sat on the first row, and I thought, oh, I don't think so. And the thing I remember in that sermon was Tim Keller saying, being good is not enough to be saved. And I remember thinking, well, I was counting on that. And I practically ran out of that church, and he asked me if I wanted to go back. I went, no way, absolutely not. But then I couldn't stop thinking about it, and 2 weeks later I went back on my own, and then a couple of weeks after that, and then by the fall I was going pretty regularly.
Somebody who is new like that, completely strange to Redeemer, has to screw up their courage to make one decision. Come to one mid-sized group. Our getaways are such a great way to assimilate people into Redeemer, a great way to plug them in. The extreme example was a man who told me afterward, after he had gone to Vermont, that he was on the verge of quitting Redeemer. He couldn't plug in, he couldn't make friends. He wound up meeting his wife on that particular getaway. That's the extreme. We don't guarantee that.
Some of my closest friends that I have now, I've actually met on retreats. And how can you beat that after just one weekend?
Complete strangers, people completely new to Redeemer, go on a getaway. They walk away with at least a dozen new friends. They wind up in small groups, wind up doing mercy projects. We believe that the gospel, the good news of Jesus, will change anybody's life. But we believe to have that happen, they've got to connect with other people who know and love Jesus.
If someone were to come to me and say, you know, I find Redeemer a very large place, it's kind of impersonal, I don't know where to go from here, I'm challenged by the teaching, I love the worship, but what else can I do? I would say become a member of a fellowship group.
When we look back on the way fellowship groups have performed and that they were here when September 11th happened, the fellowship groups served as family, as community for those who belonged to them. I personally, and I think most of the staff, are really grateful because God prepared Redeemer and the people who were in fellowship groups for a time like this.
When you're part of a group, you're faced with opinions and thoughts and ideas that are not your own, that comes from another source, and you're forced to sort it through and see whether or not it jives with what you believe. And sometimes you find out what you believe is wrong.
Now there are lots of other outcomes from being in community with other people and working through what does it mean to believe the gospel? What does it mean to follow Christ? Maybe there's a cluster of groups somewhere in the church, and they begin to do some things together and say, hey, maybe we should start a church in this area of the city, to be involved in the mission of the church in terms of planting churches.
But I think most New Yorkers want money and success,
What would make New York better are more documentary producers asking people questions about how to improve the city.
You know, I want my career to take off, and I want to find somebody and, you know, eventually get married and have kids.
We have to always work at developing community, not just simply nurturing relationships, supportive relationships, but Redeemer wants to be an alternate New York City in New York City for New York City, a counterculture, and building community in New York is always a huge challenge. Redeemer always can do better at that.
The vision for Redeemer has changed my life in terms of their church planning, is to realize the importance of stepping out of your comfort. If you're in a pre-existing church or a church that's already been in a community, it's really easy to just kind of sit back and do as little as it takes to keep things going, to sustain things. But with the church planting vision, it makes you realize that Christ is calling you to be active, to be involved.
So I've noticed in my own opportunities here at Emmanuel to lead and to serve, because it's such a small church, I've gotten so much more from God. He's taught me so much. The people here at Emmanuel have taught me so much. I've grown in my understanding of God, and also in my courage to be able to follow Him.
We have always said at Redeemer that the gospel is not just something that changes a person when they meet Christ. The gospel then changes every single part of my life. It changes the way I work, it changes my relationships in the neighborhood, it changes me psychologically, socially, every way.
People feel like they've got to be completely ready, totally experienced to go do ministry. The fact is, you'll never be completely ready, you'll never be experienced until you go out there and you fail. And so what Redeemer in the earliest days and even now allows people is basically to try ministry in a sense about an inch before they're ready for it. And go out there and be stretched to make mistakes, but to have the support that can help people kind of correct those mistakes, learn from them, move ahead. That's the only way I've ever grown.
One of the things that I've sincerely appreciated about Redeemer is that positions of service are open to anybody. You can be part of the tape ministry without having a degree in audiovisual, communications. You can be part of the communion ministry. You can be part of the ushering team. There is room for everybody.
When you consider that Redeemer is no longer just a local church, an expression of church in the city, but a movement of churches, the opportunities for service extend way beyond Sunday operations. So for people who have a hankering to be involved in, say, communications with audio, video, print media, web media, we have real need for co-leaders and hosts of small groups. 120 plus small groups only touch a third of our congregation. John Mason leads the midweek ministry, both to Midtown business community and the downtown business community. And great opportunity there for helping develop a pioneering ministry.
For me, it increases the sense of community. I like being able to participate in service with other members of my family.
In order to get more deeply invested in the vision, there's several levels. If you're not a member, you ought to consider becoming a member. If you're not a member, or you are a member and you're not in a small group, my suggestion certainly is, level 2, be involved with a small group. Don't just join. If you're already in a small group, you can go deeper by either becoming more involved as a volunteer. There are many, many opportunities, Hope for New York and many other opportunities around the city and the church to be a volunteer. Or you can give yourself to greater leadership training so that you could be equipped to take more leadership in the Christian ministry of New York City and in Redeemer. And then fourthly, there's the financial investment, always necessary. So membership, small group involvement, volunteering, and/or giving yourself to leadership training, and giving financially to the ministry.
From the Proverbs, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. What kind of church do we need to be so that the city rejoices over us, and we are all seeking to give our energies to make Redeemer that kind of a church?
People are drawn to other people and drawn to areas where there are large concentrations of people. It's also one of the reasons why New York is so diverse. The diversity breeds more diversity because people feel like they can get along. There's something for everyone here.
Real New Yorkers love it so much as it is.
but I don't know what would make it a better place.
I'm spending the rest of my life here because the vision is bigger and more exciting than any vision I've ever heard. And it's not one that I really made up. It's one that came out of a community of people that got the church started in 1989, and I'm committing my whole life to it, and I would like to invite as many other people to come in and work on it as well.
What would the right churches look like? What would they have to do?
What would they have to do? They would have to offer a course of hope for their stewards and a sense of direction, and with that would come peace and happiness, and it would probably give you motivation to smile at the people in the elevators.